What if I told you the real unraveling of Bryan Kohberger didn't start with blood or a knife, but with a red pen, a bad grade, and a classroom full of students who turned on him, a rejected dinner invitation, a classroom humiliation, a neighborhood that quietly locked its doors. This isn't just the story of a crime, it's the slow, silent collapse of a man who was desperate to belong, and even more desperate to be feared. And the scariest part? His own criminology professors, the experts trained to spot this, never said a word. Why? Before we get into it, help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers before the end of this month. Tap that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell us what you think in the comments. Thank you. And now, let's dive deep. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful, it's loaded. And in Bryan Kohberger's story, silence became a warning no one heard until it was far too late. At Washington State University, Kohberger started to unravel. It began with whispers, then turned into open resentment. Students were frustrated by his rigid grading. Classmates found his behavior arrogant, even aggressive. He was accused of over-talking, of dominating conversations, and of making offensive anti-LGBTQ remarks. In one instance, a student literally walked out mid-interaction. That's where it all began. A subtle social death, now infamously called bad teacher gate. But it didn't end in the classroom. His neighbors were uneasy. One tried to welcome him, because Kohberger's father had asked, but even that attempt was quickly shut down. The neighbor's wife had a gut feeling and said, "Don't bring him around again." Imagine being 28 and needing your dad to ask someone to be your friend. From that moment on, Kohberger seemed to spiral. Isolated, paranoid, humiliated. He was cited for driving late at night without a seatbelt in Moscow, possibly scouting neighborhoods. He sent unanswered Instagram DMs. And just months later, 4 students in that very city were murdered. And yet, through all this, why did none of his criminology professors speak out? We've heard from neighbors, barbers, bartenders, even students. But the very people who taught him how to profile killers? Nothing. That silence, that is what screams the loudest. Was bad teacher gate the psychological trigger? Was the rejection he felt in Pullman what pushed him to Moscow? Was this a man who simply snapped, or a man whose collapse was ignored at every turn? It was just a seatbelt ticket. A minor violation. Nothing worth remembering unless you're Bryan Kohberger. Because for him, that citation, issued at 11:40 p.m. in Moscow, Idaho on August 21st, might have meant something much bigger. It could have been his first documented step across the border. His first time leaving behind the eyes and whispers of Pullman. His first late-night visit to a town where no one knew him, yet. A reset button, a new hunting ground. In Pullman, the walls were closing in. Bad teacher gate had shattered his academic authority. He had become the subject of ridicule, not respect. He was being avoided by students, neighbors, even those who were asked to help him. According to those close to him, Bryan was spiraling. Not outwardly violent, not overtly dangerous, but sinking into something dark, silent, and calculated. He stopped grooming himself, he stopped socializing, but what he didn't stop doing was watching. Neighbors in Pullman began noticing strange behavior. His apartment window, once covered, was now partially exposed. Lights flickered at odd hours, and Bryan, always isolated, was becoming something else entirely. Withdrawn, and the more the world turned away from him, the more he turned toward Moscow. August 21st, the first trip, that seatbelt ticket placed Bryan in Moscow late at night, alone. A routine traffic stop? Sure, but what was he doing there? No friends, no classes, no appointments, just driving. Some believe this may have been his first dry run, his first attempt at blending in, observing. We know that between August and November, Bryan returned to Moscow multiple times, enough to become familiar with the streets, the layout, and potentially his alleged targets. Did he choose the King Road house that night? Did he sit outside watching shadows move through the windows? Was he there to test something? To prove to himself that he could do it? Throughout September and October, Bryan's behavior became more erratic. Reports suggest he began messaging women connected to the King Road house on Instagram. Simple greetings. Hey, how are you? Nothing creepy on the surface, but none of them replied. Not one. That pattern repeated, again and again, and each silence might have felt like a slap. It wasn't just social failure anymore. It was rejection from people he was watching. people he may have already chosen. Then there's the disturbing detail that Bryan reportedly began binge-watching true crime content in September, including dramatizations of serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer. There's no proof that the Netflix series caused anything, but its timing, paired with his own criminology studies, could have created a dangerous cocktail. What happens when a man with a fragile ego, a failing social life, and a background in criminology starts immersing himself in the minds of infamous killers? He doesn't just study them, he starts identifying with them. Around this time, Bryan's once obsessive focus on grading disappeared. He stopped commenting on papers. He stopped engaging with students. His attendance in class became more erratic, but he was still seen, walking around campus in black gloves, sometimes even indoors. This was a man building a routine, rehearsing something, sharpening something, both figuratively and literally. Some have theorized that Bryan saw the King Road house as symbolic, loud, popular, lively, a house full of everything he didn't have: connection, friendship, youth, freedom. To someone like Bryan, who likely saw himself as misunderstood and unappreciated, that house wasn't just a home. It was a challenge, a rejection of his entire existence. And in his mind, the only way to reclaim control was to make it stop. This is where the silence gets heavier. Bryan's professors had stopped interacting with him in meaningful ways. One of his criminology mentors, who had initially supported him, was no longer speaking publicly. Bryan's own parents seemed concerned. His father even flew across the country to drive him home during the holidays, possibly sensing something was off. But no one stepped in. No one pushed harder. And Bryan kept walking in the dark. In late October, something inside Bryan reportedly shifted. According to reports, he began stalking the area near the King Road house. His phone was pinged near the location more than a dozen times prior to the murders. He wasn't just fantasizing anymore. He was mapping. And if this was his way of taking back power, his twisted version of being seen, then each step closer to the house was a step deeper into a crime that would horrify the nation. Through all this, one group remains conspicuously absent: Bryan's criminology professors at Washington State University, the ones who lectured about criminal profiling, the ones who encouraged discussion about deviance, motive, and behavior. They have said nothing. While everyone else, bartenders, students, neighbors, barbers, have come forward, the trained professionals remain in the shadows. Were they afraid of what they missed? Or are they hiding from what they knew? It was a cold November night in Moscow, Idaho. The kind of cold that wraps around your bones and makes the world feel small, still, and silent. But the silence that fell over King Road on November 13th, 2022, wasn't peaceful. It was the silence that comes just before everything breaks. From the outside, the house at 1122 King Road looked like a student paradise. Bright lights, laughter, music, a safe space where 4 vibrant young lives crossed paths. Inside were Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They were roommates, friends, a couple, students full of plans and possibilities. They had no reason to believe they were being watched. But Bryan Kohberger, allegedly, had been watching for weeks. He had studied their routines. Phone pings suggested his car had circled the area at least a dozen times. He knew their habits, their comings and goings. He even returned to the scene the next morning, according to investigators. But on the night of November 13th, just after 4 a.m., he didn't come to watch. He came to end it. He parked just down the hill, not too far, not too close, a white Hyundai Elantra. Later, it would become a key piece of the investigation. But in the darkness, it was just another car. Inside the house, all the lights were out. The party had ended hours ago. Madison and Kaylee had returned from a night out at a bar. Xana and Ethan had just gotten back from a frat party. Upstairs, downstairs, everyone was home. Locked doors, soft breathing, silence, until it wasn't. Investigators believe Bryan entered the home through the sliding glass door at the back. A weak point, a known entrance. He likely started on the second floor. That's where Xana and Ethan were sleeping, together in Xana's room. But something happened. Xana had been awake. Evidence showed defensive wounds, bruises. She fought back, hard, and in the seconds it took for her to realize what was happening, Ethan was killed. Then her. One of the last things she did? Order DoorDash. It was delivered just moments before the attack. Her phone was found clutched in her hand. She was texting, she was trying to get help. The third floor was next. Kaylee and Madison were found in the same bed, likely asleep. Investigators believe the attack was swift, calculated, merciless. But they also believe Kaylee suffered more injuries than anyone else. Why? Was she the intended target? Was this personal? We don't know, but we do know this. Someone in that house woke up. A surviving roommate later reported hearing crying, thuds, footsteps. She opened her door once, then again, and on the third time, she saw him. A masked man dressed in black, walking silently out of the sliding glass door. She froze. He walked right past her and disappeared into the night. She locked her door and called no one for nearly 8 hours. That silence has haunted this case ever since. Bryan got in his car and drove away, back to Pullman, back to his apartment. Back to a world that had no idea what had just happened. But investigators would soon uncover a trail he couldn't erase. Cell phone data, surveillance footage, a knife sheath, left behind in the bed with Madison and Kaylee, containing DNA. DNA that would later be matched to Bryan's family through genealogy tracing. A near match, found on the leather snap of a Ka-Bar knife. He'd left his fingerprint behind. By the time the police were called, the scene inside the house was unspeakable. Officers described it as the most brutal crime they had ever witnessed. Blood seeped down the walls. The entire house was a crime scene. Friends had arrived before police. The surviving roommates were in shock. A call to 911 was made from inside the house, placed by another friend who had been summoned to help. But help was too late. 4 lives gone, and the suspect had already returned to the area, allegedly driving back to the crime scene just hours later. Why? Was he revisiting it for satisfaction? Or to make sure the silence he left behind remained? Experts now believe the crime was a display of dominance, revenge, and reclamation of power. Not a spontaneous outburst, a planned, rehearsed, intentional act of violence. A man who felt ignored, mocked, rejected. A man who had studied criminology so deeply that he may have tried to engineer the perfect crime. But he left behind clues, because no matter how much theory he consumed, no matter how many killers he studied, he wasn't a phantom. He was human. And he made mistakes. News of the murders stunned the community. Candlelight vigils, memorials, and media swarmed the tiny college town. But Bryan Kohberger returned to class, returned to campus. He even sat through lectures on forensic psychology, listening to discussions about the very crime he may have committed. Classmates said he didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared. And weeks later, on a cross-country drive with his father back to Pennsylvania for winter break, he was arrested. His silence finally broken. Thank you for watching. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think, if it's given you a glimpse into the quiet horrors that sometimes go unnoticed, please subscribe. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 followers before the end of this month. It means more than you know. And to Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, you are not forgotten